In the spring of 1288, on this very river, an entire mighty fleet of the Mongol Empire, the largest empire humanity had ever known, was sent to the bottom in the span of a single tide. Not by some miraculous weapon, but by wooden stakes and a deep understanding of the river. This is the story of one of the most ingenious traps in all of military history. Hello everyone, and welcome. Today, let us travel back 700 years to the Battle of Bạch Đằng in 1288, widely regarded as the crowning masterpiece of the great Vietnamese commander Trần Hưng Đạo. First, a word about the river. The Bạch Đằng was the great water gateway from the north into the Red River Delta. Because it was so strategically vital, this river witnessed northern invaders crushed not once but 3 times, by No Quyen in 938, by Lê Đại Hành in 981, and in the battle we tell today in 1288. To grasp the scale of this victory, you must understand the enemy. In the mid-13th century, Mongol cavalry swept from Asia into Europe, toppling the Jin and the Song, founding the Yuan dynasty. Kublai Khan became emperor of an empire with precedent in size. To him, tiny Đại Việt should have been a matter of days. But Đại Việt would not be swallowed so easily. In 1258 and again in 1285, Mongol armies poured across the border, and both times were forced to flee, undone by a scorched earth defense and the fierce counterattacks of the Tran dynasty. For an empire that had never tasted defeat, this was an unbearable humiliation. The first invasion came in 1258 under King Tran Tai Tong. The Mongol general Uryan Dai struck down from Yunnan. The Tran deliberately withdrew, leaving Tonglong empty, then counterattacked at Dong Bo Dao, forcing the enemy to flee in under a month. It was a first warning that the Mongols simply ignored. The second invasion in 1285 was on a far greater scale. Prince Togon and the renowned general Sogatu caught Đại Việt between north and south. At times, the Tran had to retreat again and again, hanging by a thread. But then, the battles of Ham Tu, Truong Duong, and Tay Ket turned the tide. Sogatu was slain, and Togon fled home hidden inside a bronze pipe. The strength of Đại Việt lay not only in its army, but in the hearts of its people. At the Dien Hong Council, the elders cried out as one, "Fight!" Trần Hưng Đạo wrote his proclamation to the officers to rally the troops, and the soldiers of the Tran tattooed upon their arms 2 words, "Kill the Mongols." This was the famous spirit of Dong A. And so, in 1287, Kublai Khan threw everything into a third invasion. This time he prepared far more thoroughly. Prince Togon led the great land army, while a powerful fleet under the commanders Omar and Fan Ji advanced by sea and river, escorting an enormous convoy of grain ships. According to the old chronicles, this invading force numbered in the hundreds of thousands, with 500 warships and 70 transport vessels. That figure may well have been inflated in the telling, but it makes one thing clear: this was a terrifying war machine, one that seemed unstoppable. On the water, warships were the decisive weapon. The Yuan had large, tall, heavy vessels, powerful in a head-on clash, but clumsy and hard to maneuver in narrow river channels. The Tran, by contrast, used small, light, fast boats that slipped nimbly about, perfectly suited to ambush and to fire attack. In early 1288, the Yuan forces advanced and captured the capital, Tonglong. But when they poured in, they found only an empty city. The Tran court had withdrawn on purpose, evacuating the people and hiding away all the grain. The enemy took the city, but not a single grain of rice. And then came the turning point, at Van Don. The general Tran Can Yu ambushed and shattered the grain convoy of Zhang Wenhu. All the food meant to sustain the great army sank to the bottom of the sea. King Tran Yan Tong remarked, "What the enemy needs most now is food, and their food they have just lost." Without supplies, in a strange and hostile land, the Yuan army was soon crippled by hunger and disease. Togon was forced to order a full retreat. Omar chose to withdraw his fleet down the Bạch Đằng River, the very same route by which he had come in. It would prove a fatal mistake. Consider the balance of the two sides. The Yuan were numerous, their ships large, but they were starving and exhausted. The Tran had fewer boats, yet they knew every channel and every tide, and their commander had laid a most cunning trap. Do note, all figures for troops and ships here come from old chronicles and are only estimates. The man who devised that trap was the supreme commander Trần Hưng Đạo, also known as Trần Quoc Tuan. He was the soul of all three resistances against the Mongols, the author of the famous Proclamation to the Officers. At Bạch Đằng, he did not invent a new stratagem, he revived an ancient one, in a way no one expected. His opponent, Omar, was a battle-hardened and ruthless commander who had fought in the war against the Song. It was Omar who committed many atrocities during the advance, and it was his arrogance and complacency after twice crossing the Bạch Đằng unharmed that would cost him dearly.
Trần Hưng Đạo idea reached back 300 years. In 938, Ngô Quyền had planted stakes in this very Bạch Đằng River to destroy the southern Han fleet. The Grand Commander chose to use that same old trick again, gambling that the Yuan, having passed the river safely before, had grown careless and would never see it coming.
Planting these stakes was a silent feat. Thousands of massive ironwood and tow trunks had to be felled deep in the forest, hauled out, sharpened, and driven deep into the riverbed. All of it done in secret, relying on the strength of soldiers and local villagers alike, people who knew every current and every sandbar at this river mouth. For many months beforehand, he had soldiers and villagers fell thousands of ironwood and tow trees, timber as hard as iron. The stakes were sharpened, tipped with iron, and driven in secret into the riverbed, right at the channel mouths leading out to the sea. Where the water was too deep for stakes, they strung iron chains across instead. But the stakes were only half the trap. The other half was the tide. Here at the mouth of the Bạch Đằng, the tide rises and falls by some 4 meters. At high water, the entire field of stakes lay hidden beneath the surface, and ships passed freely. But as the tide fell, those sharpened points rose up into a forest of spikes, ready to tear open the hull of any vessel. The plan was intricately arranged. A light detachment would give battle, then feign defeat, luring the enemy fleet across the stakes while the water was still high. Strong forces lay in ambush in the creeks on either bank, and all of it had to be timed to the exact moment the tide began to fall. At dawn on the 8th day of the 3rd lunar month, the tide ran high. At that very moment, the light boats of the Tran darted out to give battle, fought a few rounds, then turned and fled. Omar, ever arrogant, at once urged his whole fleet in pursuit, driving deeper and deeper into the stake-laden river. Once the enemy fleet had pushed deep into the killing ground, Tran war junks suddenly surged out from the side creeks, spreading across the river and cutting off the head of the Yuan column. The door had shut. Now the entire vast fleet was jammed together, right above the stakes they never knew were there. And then, exactly as planned, the tide began to fall. As the water dropped, the ironwood stakes rose up. One after another, the heavy Yuan warships were pierced, impaled, held fast, unable to move. The Tran forces stormed down from upriver. The chronicles record that the Bạch Đằng ran red that day. As the enemy reeled in chaos, from the Gia River came a fresh army, led in person by the senior emperor Trần Tung Tung and King Trần Yan Tong, striking the Yuan fleet in the flank. The ring closed from every side. The enemy was trapped among the stakes, among the flames, among the converging spears of the Tran. The Tran loosed fire, hurling flames onto the grounded ships. Fire blazed across the water. The Yuan, panic-stricken, leapt into the river and drowned by the thousand. Those who managed to swim to the Yen Hong bank ran straight into the infantry ambush waiting for them on land. The battle raged from the hour of the rabbit to the hour of the rooster, from early morning to nightfall. By the time the sun set, the entire Yuan fleet had been annihilated. The commander Omar was taken alive. His deputy Fan Ji shared the same fate. It was a resounding, unprecedented victory upon the water. The entire naval force of the Yuan, Togon's one hope of a safe retreat, had been destroyed on the Bạch Đằng. On land, Togon's own army was harried mercilessly all along its flight back to the border, suffering terrible losses.
Beside the Grand Commander, this victory was the work of many able generals. Nguyen Quai commanded the elite Thang Duc Guards, leading the lure and the blocking line himself. Do Han was the one who captured Omar alive, and Tran Kang Du, with his strike at Van Don, had created the turning point for the entire campaign.
The chronicles record that the Tran captured around 400 warships, along with countless enemy officers and soldiers taken or killed. Let me remind you once more, figures such as 400 ships or 40,000 troops come from old chronicles and remain debated to this day.
As for the fate of the enemy commanders, the histories differ. Omar, after his capture, was agreed the following year to be returned home. But Trần Hưng Đạo, unwilling to free so cruel a man, secretly had the returning ship scuttled, drowning him mid-river.
Why did a trap reused from 3 centuries earlier still work? Because Trần Hưng Đạo united all 3 elements: the advantage of a treacherous river, the timing of the turning tide, and the unity of an army and people of one heart. More than that, he struck at the enemy's fatal weakness, their arrogance and their hunger. The remarkable thing is that the evidence still remains. As early as 1958, stake fields were found at Yanjiang, and more recently, in 2019, excavations at Cao Quy in Thuy Nguyen uncovered further rows of wooden stakes. Many have been dated to the 13th century, though archaeologists remain cautious, urging more study. After the victory, the Tran showed the wisdom of the strong, who also know restraint. Đại Việt took the initiative to restore relations, accepting tribute in name only to preserve the peace, in exchange for lasting stability. And the Yuan, after so bitter a defeat, had little choice but to accept it. The victory at Bạch Đằng in 1288 ended once and for all the Mongol Empire's ambition to conquer Đại Việt. Kublai Khan banished Togon into exile and never again dared send an army south. Đại Việt held firm to its independence, and its renown echoed across all of Southeast Asia.
What is truly remarkable is that Bạch Đằng entered the history books 3 times. In 938, Ngô Quyên used stakes to shatter the southern Han, ending more than 1,000 years of northern domination. In 981, Lê Đại Han crushed the Song. And in 1288, Trần Hưng Đạo won the greatest triumph of all. One river, 3 times it drowned the ambitions of the north.
That glorious victory passed into poetry. The scholar Chang Han Siu, revisiting the old river, composed the Ode to the Bạch Đằng River, an immortal work, at once heroic and wistful, praising the triumph and mourning those who fell for their homeland.
To this very day, each year, the people of Quang Yen still hold the Bạch Đằng festival, honoring the sainted Tran and the forebears who came before. The river, the stakes, and the memory of victory live on in the hearts of generation after generation of Vietnamese. Let us look back at the whole picture, from the third invasion in 1287 to the crippling blow at Van Don to the fateful retreat, and at last to one decisive day on the Bạch Đằng River in April of 1288. All of it converged into one of the most brilliant victories in the nation's history.
The Battle of Bạch Đằng in 1288 was more than a military victory. It was proof of the intellect, the will, and the strength of a small nation that would never, ever submit. One river, one field of stakes, and something truly immortal was made.
700 years have passed, yet those stakes of old still lie beneath the earth at Quang Yen and Thuy Nguyen, unearthed one by one, silent witnesses to a heroic age. 3 great victories upon a single river. Bạch Đằng will forever be the pride of the Vietnamese people. Thank you all for listening, and until next time.